right, well, welcome everyone. Appreciate you all joining today. Pretty excited about the session. I know we have a lot of attendees here today. To do some quick introductions, my name is Nick Colyer. I'm the Senior Director for our Cloud and DevOps Managed Solutions group at Ahead. I've been at Ahead for just around 9 years now and help a lot of Fortune 500 companies with their day-to-day FinOps as well as cloud management initiatives and DevOps initiatives in general. And with me is Susanna Warfield. Susanna, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, I'm Susanna Warfield. I'm Managing Director of Financial Strategy for Ahead. I run our financial consulting division. So essentially my team runs in parallel with our technical teams to put a financial lens to our recommendations. I've been with Ahead for about 7 years and really look forward to the conversation today. We appreciate you joining.
Awesome, thank you. And so for our agenda today, it's titled Effective Cloud Cost Management. We really want to share a lot of lessons learned, what we do day in, day out, working with customers, some of those workflows. As Susanna mentioned, Susanna runs the financial side of the house. I work mostly on the technical side of the house. And essentially early last year, we decided to join forces and upgrade all of our FinOps offerings. And that's really what's led us here today. So as we go through the agenda, Susanna will recap FinOps for Enterprise IT. You may have been on some of our previous webinars, and Susanna presented a number of those topics. So we'll give a quick recap of where that approach and where this fits in. And then we'll get into more of the technical specifics, what the cloud FinOps team does day in, day out for our customers. We'll do a demo. I'll show you some of the tools that we use, some sample deliverables, how it all fits together. And then we'll wrap up at the end with some Q&A. So with that, we will jump straight into it. And to Susanna, pick us off.
Perfect. So as Nick mentioned, Ahead is taking a little bit more a broader approach to FinOps, and we're calling it FinOps for Enterprise IT. FinOps in the market is really a cloud-specific term. You've probably heard it related to tagging and governance and those sorts of things, but really, the practice is born from the idea that we no longer have all of these purchasing decisions flowing through procurement. We've enabled the masses to spend large amounts of money when we enable cloud. And so the practice of FinOps is really, how do we put guardrails around that? How do we structure processes and collect data to allow executives to make informed decisions with transparent financial information? And really, Ahead has been approaching all of our client engagements in that way for a long time. So we always try to put a monetary, technical, and people and process lens to our technical recommendations. And so when FinOps kind of came to light in the market, we decided to roll out essentially a 5-pillar approach for FinOps. So I'll start left to right. We have foundational financial analysis. You can think of this as sort of a high-level cost comparison of strategy A to strategy B. You can think of this in terms of tech refreshes, contract renewals, those sorts of things, as well as strategic financing opportunities. I run the financial consulting practice. This is where we're building really robust financial models, enterprise-wide, down to the asset, down to the contract level, to really support transformational initiatives for our clients, data center consolidations, cloud strategy, those sorts of things. And we get really granular because that's the kind of information that a CFO, as an example, would need to cost justify a solution. We did a webinar about this several weeks ago. We would be happy to share that recording with you. You could simply reply back to your confirmation email today, and we'll share that recording. We've come to market with IT asset management. That's our ServiceNow offering, really ensuring that we have the right assets in the right hands at the right time, because there is economic value in that. Workload optimization is another really big one that we're focused on, making sure that we have workloads in the right place, both from a technical and financial perspective, but making sure that we're hitting the key business metrics that we need as well. And last, but certainly not least, and really the focus of today's discussion is FinOps as a service for cloud. So we do have a pure cloud offering specific to FinOps, and Nick's going to go through that in a lot of detail. But moreover, we're also running in parallel. And when I say we, the financial consulting team, to put an added financial lens on top, doing some creative things with predictive analytics. And we actually have a sample that we can show you at the end. But really, we ebb and flow within all 5 pillars. The overarching theme is financial transparency, and thus FinOps for Enterprise IT is born. So with that, I will hand it back to Nick to run through the rest of the content.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and as Susanna mentioned, when we think of effective cloud cost management, one of the key things right from the get-go, as you can see, is partnering with your financial team at your organization and your technical team. So if you're a cloud team joining today, it's important to understand the other side of the house, what they're looking for. We obviously look at workload optimization, a number of those things, but there's obviously a bigger picture here overall. So what's our general approach? As we approach, day in, day out activities, whether these are Azure engineers, AWS engineers, leaders on the team, the FinOps group, maybe you form, there's some key ingredients that we have to make sure we think about either way. First one is, do we have a shared model for cloud cost management? And I'll show you some of that as we get into the presentation here a little bit. Who needs to be notified about what? Are we notifying people maybe too much in some areas and not enough in other areas? How do we put more of that empowerment downstream where possible as well? We have to prevent wasteful spend. Often when my team gets engaged with businesses that maybe have a lot of spend out of control, the focus is always on, hey, I moved everything, maybe I did a lift and shift in a hurry, and I want to just remediate it and get it back to the most optimized state. Well, that's great, but there's still more waste coming into the environment. And so it's critical not just to optimize what's there, but prevent future waste in cloud. Remediation of existing deployments, we'll talk through some examples of that, and that could be container-based optimization, VM optimization, other PaaS service optimization, lots and lots to cover in that topic, and we'll go through the workflow and how we do that. Empower the business units with visibility and transparency. So this is key as well, because do we always want this to be a central team that's coming down and pushing on the business units? The answer here really is we want to empower them where we can, give them that information and see if they can take the action themselves before coming to us to deal with a central IT. Implementing policies. So this is policies as code, and we'll talk through some examples there to really ensure good hygiene. That's also part of the prevention part of this. And then last but not least, I think this is the most critical item, and where we see my team engage day in, day out with customers, is we have to execute the changes. We can have all the reports and tools in the world, and we'll go through some of those reports here, but if nobody's actually executing change control and taking action, you cannot realize any of those savings as you go through. So what's the shared model example, first of all? Well, this could be as simple as something like this. And when we work with customers, we do it in all sorts of different ways, but just thinking about your silos, and everyone's a little bit different. You might have finance, IT operations, enterprise architecture, individual product and app teams, maybe you've got subscription or account owners, subscriptions for Azure, accounts for AWS, for example, executive team and security teams as well. And so really it's a case of thinking about who needs to be notified about what elements of day-to-day FinOps activities for cloud. So overall cloud spend, well, that's more at the high level. Maybe that's you negotiating with EDP or EA with Microsoft, for example. How are we tracking towards that overall cloud spend? Individual workloads, we don't necessarily need to surface those up to finance all the time, unless maybe it's a new budget request for a subscription or account. But who needs to be notified there? Who needs to care about cost reclamation? Who wants to know about untagged assets? A lot of people think that's just a cost item and a financial item, but it's also often a security item as well, knowing what assets aren't tagged in the cloud so they can be identified and remediated. And then quarterly reviews, who's going to be included in those. And so this is an example and something you can tailor for your business, but a good starting point, just thinking through some of the high-level functions that have to take place with FinOps for cloud. Moving further, let's talk about the scheduled workflows that every team really needs to make sure they undertake. And again, there could be a couple more. We see additional ones that we add for customers when we do consulting workshops. But these four are pretty standard, I would say, with 99% of our customers today. The first one is our new workload or budget alert. So what that means, this is under that prevention category. So think about this. When we say workflow, this doesn't mean that it's a week-long item that involves a lot of handles. The goal here is really thinking about something new is coming to the cloud. We want to ensure, A, it's optimized. We've done some due diligence, some review. And two, that we create a budget and some prediction around what that spend should be. This could be as simple as a kickoff call with the application team to review that workload, plus its expected growth. Is this something that's going to scale linearly? Is it something that's going to scale up and down on demand? Those kind of questions need to be answered. The second part there is tag and alignment. And you'll hear me talk more about tagging later on. Susanna and I, on every engagement we're on together, the first thing we do when we're trying to figure out what's in the cloud is look at the tagging structure. We've seen as high as 80% tagged effectively. Often we see as low as 20%. And it's one of the first housekeeping things to get right. But how do you keep it that way in the future? Well, we need to make sure that when we're deploying things in the cloud, they are tagged appropriately. And again, I'll give you some examples as we get deeper and deeper into it here. Last part here before deployment is, have we predicted the costs to run it? Now, that could be as simple as going to one of the public cloud calculators, like the Azure pricing calculator, AWS, or Google pricing calculators, and estimate the cost for those workloads. And that could also mean using a custom calculator, so something a little bit more complex, like you're looking at database options, SQL to RDS, etc. Those things can come into it. And you might say, okay, the public cloud calculator got me so far, but now there's a little bit more granular detail that I need to scale. Then we would move on to deployment and creating that budget. So if you think about everything up to this point, this is all about just preparing for deploying, making sure we've got the information. Again, this could be 15 minutes, not days, not weeks on end. But if we deploy something in the cloud, and we'll see some examples in the harness tool, and we're going to go through that in a minute. Let's deploy it and immediately create a budget for that workload. Now we know the expected costs, and then we can configure thresholds, triggers, etc., to notify people. This could be the app team or the IT teams when we breach those thresholds. So think of this for every workload when going through migrations, critical element there. In addition to the individual workload, we sort of dial it back a little bit. You've also got that overall budget, if you will, as well. How are we trending? Maybe we've got a multi-million-dollar per year commitment with one of the large public cloud providers. Well, let's talk with IT operations and finance. Let's figure out what that is. There's still tag in there with the tag subscriptions and accounts, know who they're for, they're shared or they're individual, those kind of things. And we should create a budget there as well. And there's also a budget for things like your shared services. This comes up a lot with customers. They ask, hey, how do I spread those out? And do I spread those out by percent everybody uses? Do I brother spread them and say I've got 50 app teams, they're all going to get an equal share of the shared hub? Those are items that really come into play here. But either way, we would still have a budget and notification, so we're tracking. The one key difference here is that the alert generally increases over time. We don't want to just, we know we're going to be growing in the cloud, well, that alert needs to grow with us as well. Then we get on to reclamation activities. So like, just go back for a second. These are about budgets, prevention. So we've got the new workload, we've got the overall budget. But what about all those things that are running in my cloud environment today? Well, we have to analyze them. We do this on a daily and monthly basis, and different detail levels happen in both of those cadences. But if we think of analysis, first thing we would do is reserved instance analysis. This is a low-hanging fruit. On AWS, this might result in a savings plan or ROI that we'll get into a little bit more. Resize SKU analysis. This is all about looking at the workloads, even things like VMs, which we aren't, and maybe we're going to keep as a VM, we aren't going to modernize. Are they on the most optimized SKU for that workload? If anyone's not aware, Amazon and Microsoft add new SKUs as new Intel chipsets, etc., come along, and you can convert from one SKU to another and maybe get some pricing concessions there. The other key piece of this is, for example, maybe you in Azure and you provisioned on D series instances, but you'd be better off on an E or an F, an E being memory optimized and an F being CPU optimized. So this way you can reduce your spend while still maintaining the same performance for that workload. Shutdown recommendations are critical as well. This is us looking for things that can be shut down, and we can count the amount of times every time we do an engagement, we see things like Joe's server 5 and somebody was just in a hurry and Nick test 1 or something like that. Those things are there. Let's just turn those off immediately. We know they aren't long-term applications, and make sure we can reclaim that spend immediately, or push them into dev test type subscriptions. We can also have some pricing concessions with them as well. Misprovisioned resource analysis, and this could be a variety of things, can also include waste, as you see waste identification there as well. But something was deployed, isn't optimal, maybe using the wrong SKU and a mixture of the wrong services, maybe there's some waste around it as well, like some disks left around. Those are the kind of things we're really looking for that. This cycle never ends, and we have to make sure we're analyzing. So we'll talk about remediation here in a minute, but this, never ends as we go through. Eventually, we'll get to an optimized state, and the analysis will be much quicker. But initially, if you've been in a hurry, you've probably got probably a lot of options there. As we move to the action plan, this is now taking that analysis and saying, okay, what should I do with it? And really, it comes down to 3 things. Am I going to optimize? How you keep it? I'm going to keep it running in the cloud. Well, that's great. I'm going to keep it running in the cloud. But what's the best way I can run that workload? And that's the question to really ask ourselves. Do I run it with a savings plan? Do I run it with a reserved instances? Are my reserved instances balanced correctly? Am I getting the most out of them? Can I change the SKU, as I mentioned a minute ago? And better yet, is there an opportunity to modernize or re-architect that workload for cloud? That's an interesting debate, because not all of that is, hey, I'm going to recode that application. We know we can modernize, we can turn an application into cloud-native architecture, but perhaps I'm just moving from, say, SQL to a database service, a PaaS service that can support SQL and get other operational benefits there as well. We can also schedule for deletion, remove waste, or maybe I need more information from the app team. Again, at this point, we've identified waste, we've identified cost savings, but we're not realizing any cost savings yet. And the only way really to do that is to review standard emails of notification that we can send to application team, review with the action plan with the stakeholders. But ultimately, savings only happen once we execute the change control. So you still need your AWS, your Azure, your GCP engineers standing by, to go and execute those changes as quickly as possible, because every day there's a dollar lost basically in this space. And so those are all the reclamation activities there. So we covered 3 workflows. There's one more, and that's the untagged assets report that you're going to hear us come back to time and time again here. This is all around gathering the untagged asset reports from the tools that we have, identifying those resources, remediating the tags. There's nothing exciting or fun about this. It's somebody's got to go and add the tags to the resources, but there could be a nice script that you create to pull it from a spreadsheet and go do it. We'll run the report again, we'll review the results. And our goal here, and I would advise anybody here who's just trying to remediate the environment, is measure yourself to 100%. The goal is not a 95% tag, 99% tag. The goal is 100%. Every single resource going into cloud needs to be tagged appropriately. And not only that, it needs to have the correct tags applied to it. So if you think of key value pairs, maybe you've got business group, you should have a table of allowed business groups that are in it. They should map directly to perhaps what you have in CMDB or another source of truth as to what your business groups are. But that's a critical element there. So with that, we're going to jump into a little bit of a demo here. And we have a choice pretty heavily in managed solutions where I work of which tools we use. There are probably 50, maybe even 100 tools in the space today, and there's do-it-yourself tools as well. We partner very closely with Harness, and they're one of the DevOps tooling engines out there, as well as cloud cost management tooling. And that's the one I really want to focus on today and give you a really quick demo on. I know I've seen raised hands and Q&A, but we'll get to all that at the end as we get through that. So zoom in. I am still logged in, which we'll check quickly. Good to go, and the demo gods are shining today, shall we say. This is the example of a cloud cost management dashboard that you would see straight away as you log into something like Harness Cloud Cost Management. And immediately, you'll see a number of things in the top: total cost, the forecasted cost. Carbon emissions is something they've been adding recently as well. So a lot of people obviously very concerned about that today. And as part of that, you can start to measure that. But not only the cloud costs from a pure SKU perspective, you'll start to see things like cost to cost breakdown as well. And that's a key shift that we're seeing is development teams want to understand their Kubernetes infrastructure, how they run those pods on top there from the container-based workloads, and get idle costs, utilized costs, and unallocated cost of those areas as well. From scrolling down as well, we'll get to recommendations in a minute, but you also see cost by cloud providers. So you'll also have a mix of GCP, AWS, and Azure in a lot of customers' environments. The parts we focus on primarily when we get started, first of all, back to tagging our perspectives. So there's some built in already. We've got the general cluster perspective, the container-based infrastructure, what's running in Azure, what's running in AWS, what's running in GCP. We can do something like look at the major departments. First of all, this is a common one that we'll put together. And we'll start to break down all those departments and what they're essentially spending in cloud. And just let it build up here for a second. There you go, it's starting to build out. And now you can look down and start to see, okay, e-commerce, manufacturing, marketing, IT, R&D, finance, etc. And you can start to see the big consumers and perhaps where you need to spend most of your time initially, just given the trends there. If there's one team spending 1%, on cloud of your overall budget, definitely want to get to them, but you're probably not going to move the needle as quickly with those. And you can drill down into these and go through further. We're going to go through a few more perspectives here, but this is a quick sort of way to look at, first of all. If I go back to perspectives for a moment, you can also start to group by various departments like data science, for example. You can build folders and different perspectives inside there. So we could have a data science team. We can build a perspective around data science, Kubernetes efficiency, CCM product spend overall, perhaps they've got a product there. Or I can just click into the data science team. In this one, they've got a mix of GCP and Azure. And we'll let this build out here for a second. And now I'm looking directly at the data science team, and immediately I can see a couple of things here. Here's my total cost. Here's my budget to the right. I'll show you more on budgets here in a moment. But we can already see we've exceeded the budget by $26,222.37. And then we've got our forecasted costs. We're expected to hit around 40,000 by a month, between Feb 21 and March 22, specifically that. No recommendations for this workload around the container-based and IaaS optimization, but we're over budget. So not a lot of opportunity to optimize, but we're over budget. We didn't plan for it to be. Obviously this is an example. You come up with your budgets, etc. But this shows us immediately there's an issue there. We can start to look down. I'll come back to anomaly here in a minute. You probably saw there, but you can start to see the services then as well. And BigQuery has obviously got a big cost trend increase here. Kubernetes cluster and engine going down, and then artifact registry is going up there as well. So we can immediately start to see what perhaps the services are that are being consumed more by this team, and then go and talk to them about that. Or if they've got access to the dashboard, which is what we recommend, they can start to take action themselves. We can also look across here and start to see by day what it's looking like, and the tool will automatically prompt us and show us, hey, we've probably got an anomaly right here on this particular day. So it's Feb 8th. We can see that, and likely again, BigQuery, a lot of data probably added and some additional workload put on that day. Now we can view the anomalies more and more. Again, we'll get through that as we go through. But you can already see this helps immensely empower. If you can create perspectives for each team, tagging makes making perspectives even easier. But you can also manually create them in group resources, and there's other ways to put them together if you're not seeing what you need based on your tagging structure. So we talked about budgets at the individual level, but now you can see all the different budgets across your various departments. And this is useful for finance as well. Perhaps if the cloud bill's coming in and we're like, hey, it's way over budget, what's going on here? Well, you can skim down through here and look at the budgets and start to see at an individual level who is over budget, and then start to drill in. So we can sort of click into one of these, we can click on the engineering budget, and we can get some additional detail. We can tweak that budget, still building out, but you'll be able to click edit here and tweak that budget if we wanted to as well. And again, this goes back to that workflow of everything we're putting in the cloud, and we can create the perspective, and we can create the budget off that perspective, and that tells us whether something's correct or going off the grid. Anomalies, it's much easier to handle these at the perspective level, but in general, if you want to look through, if someone's in shared services wants to go through and look across, you can go through and look across all the anomalies, they're all grouped in here as well, and see what's available to go and look at. And this just helps you look and say, if something massively spikes up, if a whole bunch of VMs scale up, is that even an indicator of a potential ransomware type attack? Is something else going on, or someone turning your cloud infrastructure into a Bitcoin mining operation? The kind of things you can look for there. Recommendations. So across the environment here, this is going to give you a broad brush view across the environment. Again, you can see them at the micro level of where you can save money in the environment. And it's going to automatically recalculate this as it gets the data from the cloud providers. It's going to do this across both your IaaS and your container-based infrastructure, and you'll be able to see your potential monthly savings. So it's highly optimized demo environment here, obviously not as big as what you do live. When you put these in and connect it to your container infrastructure, you'll see hopefully some pretty healthy options for cost savings there. Now there's a commitment orchestrator as well. You're not going to see much in this demo environment, but one of the new items that we work on pretty heavily, and a lot of customers gave feedback, were, hey, we do a lot of commitment analysis right now. How do I start to think about my savings plans, reserved instances, on demand, and start to automate more of that as we go through? So that's a new feature that's recently been added here as well. Auto stopping rules can look at web traffic, can look at your load balancer, can do HTTP checks, and we can start to bring services up and down. These could be used in parallel with some of the scale sets and things available to you in Azure and AWS to automatically size those workloads appropriately. And last but not least, there's also a bunch of built-in dashboards. If I said, hey, I want to go straight and get an Azure cost dashboard, those exist out of box. We tend to customize a lot of these as you go through. but you can start to see top 5 most expensive services by month. We actually pull this pretty early when we look at customer environments. If we see such a heavy weight of virtual machines and don't see a lot of PaaS services, that gives us an indication too of areas we can optimize for cost. So a lot there, obviously, a lot in these tools. There's other features in the DevOps space that also integrate in here. But cloud cost management just becomes a central view that not only IT or the cloud team is going to be using, we want the individual teams to use it, we want finance to use it, and it really just helps pull all that data together. So with that, I'm going to jump back to our slides here, and let's look at a few samples of some of the things we see there. So this is an example. I didn't pull this report when we were in the demo, but spend by business unit and perhaps spend by product. We see these pretty often across our customer base. This is a sanitized example here, and you can see, no business unit, pretty sizable amount of cost there. And then, various attempts to create business units. And we see this across all our customers. We can see so many reports that look pretty similar. Same in product, no product tag, but sanitize, these other ones where they were. And so what we think about when we see no business unit being a very common one, and this is an Azure customer in this example, we would suggest applying Azure policy templates as a preventative measure here, as well as mass remediating existing gaps to improve the perspective as well. So we'd basically take this export of all the workloads. It is an exercise. Somebody's got to go through and say, okay, whose is that? This one, this person, you've probably got an idea. Maybe they were grouped by subscription. But we would take that and then run a script, populate the tags, and then go and create the perspectives to get you into that good hygiene, healthy state, if you will. The 2 key things there that we've only touched on a little bit with tagging, as I mentioned, and policy definitions. So it's important to have a spreadsheet, just define your tags, or use ServiceNow, have a center of truth for the tags, if you will. And here's an AWS example. Yeah, where we see, hey, we've got a bunch of technical tags, just trying to find my mouse here for the laser pointer. There we go. So we've got a bunch of technical tags, automation tags, business tags, and security tags. In FinOps, we're obviously primarily concerned with the business tags here, so we can do some financial analysis. But it's also important to keep this, keep the other tags in mind as you look to go and create a tagging strategy. This doesn't have to just be used for public cloud. Very often customers will take the tagging strategy. If you've got a VMware environment on-prem, you'll apply vSphere web tags using the same methodology as well. The difference between these tags, really comes down to what they're used for. Technical tags is generally around the technical team operating in the environment. Perhaps we've got patch windows that we put as a technical tag, and then we have something like Tanium or a CCM pick up that tag, put the server into the appropriate patch collection, and particularly for IaaS-based workloads. Class of service, what type of support do we want to give it? Do we wake people up in the middle of the night? Depending on what's going on with that service. Automation tags, in addition, there's a lot of functions built in, and we use a lot of Lambda functions for AWS. We use logic apps and a lot of Azure functions in Azure and GCP as well. But this is all around, can we auto stop start? A lot of that's built in some of the tooling I showed you now as well. But there might be examples. We have a bad cop Lambda function, for example, that goes and kills any workloads marked as our lab every single day and keeps our costs down as well. From a business unit, department, app name, app ID, those are examples there. The one key thing, which I haven't covered yet, I can pull the sheet up at this time at the end, but is also allowed values for those tags. So you probably put an example there, but then you need to decide what are those allowed values. And that really comes into play, shifted to an Azure example again now. This is an Azure policy template where we're basically saying tags.product group allowed A, allowed B. And applying this policy template to your Azure platform essentially says to anyone deploying, whether that's through infrastructure as code or manually through the portal or through Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell, you're going to be denied if you try to deploy something that doesn't have a product group with the appropriate allowed tag. We've actually built a generator, so we just put in our key value pairs. We click a button, and actually spits out all the Azure policy templates, and then we put them in an initiative, and same for AWS with AWS SCPs and AWS config rules as well. But essentially, you want to keep these up to date. Probably have to review them every month, every 3 months, just a quick review, update them, make sure the policies still apply, and go from there. When we're doing the IaaS analysis, we blurred this out here to sanitize deliverable. We're also looking again at those SKU changes. So this is an example of a report. Can't see the detail, but these would have all been standard Ds, for example, instance types. And one of the recommendations we were looking at was how do we convert those to E's to F's? What's the cost savings for each of those? At some point, you get the tool data and you still have to go do a manual effort. We try to automate as much as we can with tools, but PaaS services, for example, are limited. You're only going to get so far where you have to actually go and look at a Redis cache service and decide how you want to manually, optimize that workload. So a lot goes into the analysis there. So I've been talking a lot. Hopefully that's all very useful, but I'm going to hand it back to Susanna here to talk about another example we have around cloud optimization with predictive analytics.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. So this is the one that I mentioned earlier on where we had financial consulting running in parallel with our technical teams. So this particular client came to us and said, we'd like you to conduct a cloud health check and do all the things that Nick just went through in detail, but we also want you to take a financial lens to it. And can you tell us whether or not we can predict cloud costs based on our revenue forecast? So kind of going back to our overall methodology, which is we've got to understand the baseline to be able to do that. We did some analysis to say, could we in fact predict based on key business metrics like revenue? So while Nick was doing his technical due diligence, my team was doing the financial due diligence, breaking down historical cloud spend, making sure we had everything tagged appropriately, redistributing shared costs down to the business units, redistributing RI costs down to the business units, and really creating that baseline profile. And we came up essentially with two parallel deliverables, which are the technical one and married it with the financial to give the overall picture. So I'll let Nick step through the technical piece. And of course, there was tons of detail behind this in terms of scorecards and recommendations and next steps. But the next slide kind of steps through some of that, and then I'll attack the financial side.
Yeah, so that's the technical side, a lot of analysis here. And we ultimately built a scorecard at the end to help the customer understand what were the findings, what was their maturity in the space. And what we wanted to show you today is this actually a customer that was on the higher end of the maturity scale as well. But there were still things that needed improvement, taggings, policy enforcement, maturity score, we went 80 there, client tagging while completing areas. There were gaps when pulling the Azure billing. It was very hard to translate that into the financial model that Susanna was trying to create for the financial office. Resource selection, we see this across the board. This was actually very well optimized, but there were options for VM SKU changes, CPU credits by using some Azure B series instances to store credits and then burst those workloads as needed. VM deletion was probably one of the best we had seen compared to somewhere we just see a lot of sprawl and waste and zombie instances out there. And you sort of get the feel for it, right? We then looked at reserved instances. We looked at all the Azure app services and app gateway, storage, Redis cache, Cosmos DB, other services. Again, this goes beyond the VM alone. There's a lot more to think about there. They were early in their Kubernetes adoption, so very limited in opportunities for savings there, but that was a key piece as well. Environment hygiene was interesting. It was mostly around unattached network cards and IPs. But what's interesting there is that doesn't really create an immediate financial impact, but it's a lot of noise and items to filter through as you sort of get into more detail. And so we come up with different scoring mechanisms depending on how much savings we can essentially get. In some customers, we saved another $20,000 on millions of spend, and others were saving 30 to 70% of that spend. So it really just depends how mature you are, how well you've done in reserved instances. They're the low-hanging fruit. They're the quickest way to save money. Reserved instances plus the resource selection in parallel are really some of the key items there. Let me pass it back to Suzanne to talk about the financial side of this.
So again, when we went out to really establish the baseline, we had to ingest a lot of cloud data. So if you think of the 300,000-ish line item CSV export coming out of the cloud tooling, we had to find a way to make sense of that. So we have a tool in-house that essentially distributes the costs as I described just a few minutes ago and pushes shared services and reserved instances down into the business units. So what you see here was really the first time this particular client had gotten a full picture of their historical cloud spend. And then of course, we married it up with the revenue actuals to see kind of what the relationship looks like. From there, we needed to determine if we could build a predictive relationship between cloud costs and revenue. And to do that, we built statistical regression models. So essentially, we looked out at each individual business unit and looked to see if there was a predictive relationship between one independent variable and cloud costs. And no surprise, kind of each individual business unit behaved differently. So Nick, if you'll go one slide ahead, we found that, one business unit responded really well to revenue. So we could predict cloud costs with a good level of accuracy by looking directly at revenue. Another one was payment volume. Another was headcount. So by looking at each individual business unit and how it behaves differently, we could create a statistical regression model for each business unit and then aggregate them together to give them an overall predictive model. So what this allowed this client to do is say, we have a new contract coming online in Q3 of next year. We expect that contract to have, X millions of dollars in revenue. We can now predict our associated cloud bump within plus or minus 10%. And I always get the plus or minus 10%, like that could be, quite large if you're talking about numbers. Well, we had 12 months of historical data to work with. And when you have a limited number of observations like that, the level of statistical accuracy is a bit limited. So we are now, in talks with this particular client to be involved in a managed relationship going forward. And when we start to incorporate incremental data going forward, we will tweak and refine those assumptions, and the statistical model will get better and more accurate over time. But not only are they using it, as a forecasting tool, they're using it to renegotiate their cloud commitments. There's a lot of really great analysis that comes from this tool. And it's one of those relationships that we want to stay involved over time and really keep that model up to date. And that really applies, across the FinOps for enterprise IT portfolio. We're establishing models of a variety of different types. We want to stay involved with our clients. We want to continue to provide that financial transparency over time, irrespective of what the initial challenge is, but just to give you a feel of some of the outputs and the data that we can provide for our clients.
All right, awesome. Well, with that, we're a couple minutes ahead, which is great. So we've got a time for Q&A. I'll stop the share here so I can open the Q&A dashboard here. And let's see if we've got any questions. They might have already been answered directly as we've been going through. But if you've got questions, I would say submit them here and we'll see if we can answer them or point you in the right direction.
One thing I think we should maybe touch on, Nick, is kind of the engagement model. I know we get a lot of questions from clients on, can you just give us the recommendations and allow us to execute all the way up to our capability to do fully managed? Maybe we touch on that while the questions roll in. Yeah,
I've got one coming out. I'll hit on that quickly. I think it's probably for you, Susanna, was what is the room for error? But before that, I think the key here, just going back to execution, is just so critical in the space. Everybody, particularly in the last 12 months, Susanna and I think are on 20 calls a week, probably at this point, talking to customers about their FinOps initiatives and then, getting our teams engaged to help them realize the benefits. And I think on the technical side, there's so many promises being delivered out there today. And the reality is, to realize any cost savings, you ultimately have to execute those changes. And so, we pull that data, as you saw, into our various tools for analysis. So we'll grab it from Harness and others, and sometimes we still log into Azure and AWS to do additional deep dive. And then the engineers are really sort of like filtering it down. Okay, these are the changes we can make to go and execute change control. And we help customers teach you how to do that, or we just do it for you. You might decide, hey, my engineers have got other things to do. They should be building, architecting these new apps. Let me rather, have a head take care of that. And that's where my team can come in as a managed solutions team. But I think that's critical. Whether we do it or you do it, it's a function you have to fill. Whether you go and hire a couple of people, or we have some people in the cloud team do it. Those are really some of the questions there. Anything you want to add, Susanna?
No, I think you got it. That's great. So I'll handle the next question was around margin of error. I think, it goes back to our overall approach, whereas we work really hard, and this kind of comes from my background specifically, which is I came from IT finance. So my role was really to do this function on behalf of my former company. And you have to spend the most of your time building that financial baseline. If we're comparing to a number that's incorrect, obviously everything from that point forward is useless. So we spend a lot of time essentially learning the ins and outs of our client's environment, both from a technical and financial perspective, to really make sure that we understand the impact of our future recommendations. So I mentioned specific to financial consulting, we build out these multi-year profiles. We want to recommend not only the next generation technology, but we want to know when to recommend it. In terms of, do you have contracted spend, or there remaining book values on your assets, those sorts of things. So to do that effectively, we have to be really laser focused on the baseline to which we're comparing. And so we try to circumvent any sort of margin of error by being in lockstep with our clients from the get-go on that profile specifically. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and then the next one here, what's the relationship you see between CMDB maturity versus ability to provide accurate cloud cost management? I wouldn't say it's not a hard requirement. It's a much easier to do it with CMDB maturity because you probably have already a lot of those relationships and applications to business units already established. One of the key questions that comes up all the time is, is the CMDB feed in the cloud tags, or the cloud tags feed in the CMDB? And it can be a political hot button as well in terms of conversation. We've got approaches on both sides, but generally speaking, as I say, we lean more to tags, vSphere web tags, cloud tags, etc., being close to the resource, and then certainly want to surface it all up and then make sure there's no discrepancies by using data operation scripts and things like that. Susanna, if you want to add anything on CMDB maturity from your side, I know some of you as well. But.
Yeah, we get a lot of, depending on which modules are in flight with our clients, we get a lot of, we have a good feel for the CMDB, but it's not necessarily linked to procurement and what the assets are physically costing us. So we do a lot of profiling on that end to kind of bridge that gap for our clients to help with decision making. That'd be the only thing that I would add there.
And then one more here. How do we communicate with clients the cost/risk of on-prem hybrid infrastructure versus cloud only? If you want to take that one first, and then we do a lot of analysis across both, and then continue to that.
Sure. So we, again, kind of going back to the process, we need to, most of our clients, or a lot of our clients, are not necessarily tracking spend all the way back to the application level. Some are, but we certainly help a lot that aren't quite there yet. So again, making sure we understand the baseline financial profile, we can create a categorical view, meaning we have, storage, network, compute, et cetera, over a multi-year period of time. And then we've got tools that look at utilization information, and we can then break down those shared infrastructure costs by the application sets that are using them. And from there, we can do some sensitivity and testing analysis to say, okay, what is this application costing us today on-prem? What is the level of effort required to support it? And what are the business values that we're getting from this application on-prem? And then we can do some scenario testing. What does it look like in private cloud? What does it look like in public cloud? And we're ingesting tools and data from a lot of different sources to really aggregate those profiles together. But we've done a handful of different deliverables to allow for scenario testing for our clients to really, again, marry the business, technical, and operational views all together.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And the only thing I would add maybe to the question from a technical lens is, when we're looking at, I think one of the big mistakes we sometimes see in cloud suitability analysis is not looking at the complete set of technical options in cloud. So you risk making potentially a bad recommendation because we're comparing like, it's cheaper on-prem, and vice versa as well. There's optimizations and ways to run things more optimally on-prem. So I think just looking at that, and Suzanne already mentioned, I'll just reinforce there's the operational benefits, the soft costs. If I can get off an OS, I don't have to patch it.
Sure.
Upgrade it and all those things, and we're still going through Windows upgrades with customers, and when it goes end of life, it's still a big effort. Some people have still got 2008 running out there. I'm sure we'll find even older versions out there if we looked hard enough. So I think that's probably the only other thing I would add there. I think it's a great question. I think that is all. There's one more out. Any self-managed alternatives? I mean, you can, instead of buying tools, you can build one of these things. It's going to be a lot of work. So that's why we lean on the industry leaders here. and really try to take a look. I'll go back to the Susanna mentioned earlier. Once you've got the tool, the execution is going to realize the cost savings. So I feel like the more engineers are highly paid resources in the cloud space. How do you make sure you're spending that time wisely? And certainly you can hire developers and build tools and stitch together and scripts and everything else. But from the technical side of CCM, my advice would be to focus your efforts more on the engineering and try to minimize your time building tools rather using what's out there. So I don't do anything from the financial side. I know it's so custom for businesses.
Yeah, I get the question a lot of how does your deliverable to compare to tools, and I think Ahead's approach in general has kind of two big differentiators as I see it. One is, from a financial consulting perspective, we're pulling in our clients' actual data. So when was the asset purchased? What was spent on it? Terms, depreciation cycles, et cetera. So a lot of the tools that I've seen out there are doing kind of snapshot in time comparison. So this is what it costs on-prem, this is what it costs in the cloud, but there's obviously a large, gap between what it costs to actually make that change and what's the right timing. So I think that's kind of the first. And then obviously to Nick's point earlier, the ability to execute in a timely way is key. So being able to kind of come around and take our recommendation and actually execute on it would be the second.
A couple more here. Does Harness have the ability to other costs from on-prem or just cloud? A lot of the automation you see is really focused around cloud there, but I'd have to defer to Harness on their roadmap. We do work with customers across on-prem as well, and we basically stitch that data together in other ways.
And that, just to add to that, Nick, that's where my team comes in a lot. We have a lot of clients that are running hybrid environments and need a centralized repository of financial data across all of it. So if you think back to the 5 pillars and how I mentioned we kind of ebb and flow throughout, for the clients that we are creating that big profile, we're feeding information back to our foundational team to do, renewals that we get line of sight to, or we're sending them up to the cloud team because we're going to execute those through marketplace and, either enhance a commit or hedge a commit. So we're constantly feeding information in and out. But again, the overarching principle here is financial transparency. So we've got a whole web of groups within Ahead that are talking and communicating and sharing data back and forth.
Yep, and then one more. Are there any certifications training that you would recommend for someone wanting to get into FinOps? Susanna, if you want to take that.
Yeah, the Linux Foundation has the Certified FinOps Practitioner track, and they've got a couple different levels of that. My team carries that certification. I think it's great. It's really informative. I know a lot of the hyperscalers themselves have their own versions of the certifications. Again, I think it goes how broadly do you want to take that information? All the certifications out there are pretty cloud focused today. And again, we're trying to take a broader approach. So I think any sort of economics, educational trainings that you can take are helpful and kind of help piece it all together.
Awesome. I think there's a couple more administrative, what are contacts in case someone needs more clarification. I would say, if you're a Ahead customer and you want to get in touch, reply all to the invite. They'll put you in touch with someone. If you got questions on the webinar, you should see it posted on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Just post your questions in the comments, and somebody will tend to get back to you. Technical support. I don't know if you're referring to the tools or not there, but I would defer to the vendor there. Susanna and I aren't available 24 hours, but I'm sure you can get help there for sure on the tools side if you've got that.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's everything.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to add? Or
no, I think, like I said, we've got a few of these recordings sitting out there. So if you want to see any of the others, we're happy to share. I think the other thing is we've got a lot of great content on ahead.com related specifically to FinOps and FinOps for enterprise IT. So if you have additional interest, please check that out as well. But we really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Really, really appreciate it. Hope this was useful. You can learn about what we do day in, day out for our customers at scale. And sure everybody wants to get the cloud bill down and have a good, healthy environment. And hope you get some good lessons learned from it. So with that, thank you and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all.